Hi, everyone. I am really excited today because I am here with Dr. Michael Brown, and Dr. Michael Brown has published a whole bunch of books. He has a really interesting show that he runs. Actually, I think it's pretty much every day. He runs this great show, Ask Dr. Brown, here on YouTube. And he also is active on social media, and he is very knowledgeable about everything. I've never seen him lose a debate. I've seen him in debates. I would actually be afraid to debate him if I were really anyone. I think that he's a formidable debater, and he's got a lot of years of experience. And he grew up as a Jewish person, and he's still Jewish, but he came to be a Messianic Jewish person now. And so I just want to show you a couple of his books. We've got Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, also Jezebel's War with America. And this is the one we're going to focus on the most today, is Jezebel. And so we're going to talk about that. And so without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce you to Dr. Michael Brown.
Hey, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to ask you, when you talk about this Jezebel's war with America, and you said she's also has a war with Australia, you said so, just a little while ago, because you went down to Australia, and I'm sure she's got a war with Europe too. And so I'm wondering, what are the signs? I mean, in case the audience doesn't know, who is Jezebel, and what signs are we getting here?
Yeah, so Jezebel in the Old Testament was a wicked queen, probably the most wicked woman mentioned in the Bible. She was a pagan princess. Her father was the king of the Sidonians. Some speculate that she would have been a high priestess in the temple of Baal. Either way, we know that she was a zealous idol worshiper. She married King Ahab of Israel, even though he himself was a wicked man. 1 Kings 21 tells us that she incited him to do more evil. We know that she killed the prophets at one time, even intimidated the prophet Elijah with fear. She's associated also with sorcery and sexual immorality. She emasculated her husband. Hence, the term Jezebel becomes infamous, of that woman is a real Jezebel, or that person is a real Jezebel. Interestingly, in the New Testament, in Revelation 2, Jesus references a woman that he calls Jezebel, whether that's her actual name or the name he gave her because of what she was doing. She claimed to be a prophet, and she wasn't, and she seduced God's people into sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. So you have similar thing, the immorality, the idolatry. And when I speak of the spirit of Jezebel, I don't mean that her ghost is alive today, but rather when you look at how she was used and the demonic destructive impact she had on the nation, that you can see the same type of thing happening. In other words, every generation is under attack from Satan. We understand that. Every generation is dealing with human nature, fallen human nature, and sin. But then you have times when a society goes in a distinct direction, and it seems to be plunging off the precipice. And when I began to connect the dots, it's just like a light went on for me, that the same demonic powers that operated through this wicked queen in Old Testament times and through this woman in the New Testament that Jesus mentions are operating again today. When I wrote Jezebel's War with America, I outlined things in terms of America. But as I was writing, I thought to myself, I could write this for Europe, as you just mentioned. I could write this for Australia, New Zealand, because I've been following news around the world. So when I just spoke in Australia, it was supposed to be in New Zealand also, that just some travel restrictions that ended up not happening because of a visa error. But we adapted the message, Jezebel's War for New Zealand, Jezebel's War for Australia, recorded some videos when I wasn't there and preached the rest. And it's just striking to see almost like people now are connecting all of these sicknesses around the world with the coronavirus. And there's similar symptoms that happens here, and you can connect the dots. It's the same with this demonic stronghold, that when you begin to look, you realize, hey, a lot of things in our society, from turning away from the one true God to idolatry, to the rise of internet porn and the sexual seduction that we have there, to the rise of witchcraft and sorcery, to the silencing of the prophetic voices, to the emasculating of men, to just a war on gender, making men into women and women into men. You just keep going down the list and you think, wow, very similar things happening that as what happened through Queen Jezebel. And if you look at what America was dealing with, say, 50 years ago, we had plenty of issues, but it wasn't these particular issues in these ways. So the purpose of the book is to lay this out so we know what we're dealing with spiritually.
Yes, and it's dangerous. I want to say hi to Joel. Joel just joined us too. Joel, can you, I don't want to make sure I can hear your speaker.
Well, we can see his smile anyway.
I can see you, Joel.
Can't
That's
hear
wonderful.
though, but it
Those are,
looks like you're happy anyway.
yeah, I can't hear you, Joel, but but anyway, I wanted to ask you, so actually you've just pointed out some really important things. I know if we go back 50 years in the United States, or we go back 50 years into Europe, people were going to church more. There was more about families, one person working and the other person staying home to take care of the kids. There was a lot of more traditional things like Leave It to Beaver. I think the Leave It to Beaver is sort of how I perceived the 1950s and 1940s here in the United States. And it seems like even from the Pew polls that the levels of religion have gone down. Less people are going to church, and atheism is growing in the United States. And of course, it's really growing in Europe. And so I do see that kind of thing. And coming alongside that seems a lot of these sorts of things that you're noticing.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a spiritual void. And G.K. Chesterton made an interesting observation. He said that then when people stop believing in God, it's not that they believe in nothing, but they believe in everything. So all types of superstitious beliefs come up, all types of idolatrous practices, people just getting totally obsessed with the things of this world and replacing worship of God with worship of things or entertainment or sports. It just becomes idolatrous in those proportions. But when we turn away from the one true God, since we're made in his image, everything else gets skewed. Everything else gets messed up. So sure, America had more than enough problems to deal with 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But when I was growing up watching Leave It to Beaver with my family or Father Knows Best, we didn't think there's no family in the world like that. No, that was like normal family. It seemed like normal life to us. And we didn't have a war on gender for men to be men and women to be women and to recognize there were distinctions there. There was no battle against that. To talk about the rise in witchcraft, New York Times had an article a few months back. When did everyone become a witch? We've reached maximum witch. That was just not what we were dealing with. Radical feminism was basically unheard of. And again, we're not talking about a healthy feminism that honors and esteems women and that says equal pay for a woman doing the same work. And we're talking about a radical feminism that despises the nuclear family, that despises marriage, that looks at marriage as an extension of rape and things like that. Exactly. Yep. Yeah, things have just changed dramatically in those ways. Even the whole emasculating of men, as we saw Jezebel emasculating Ahab in the Bible. If you think back to the shows that I would have grown up with, I turned 65 in a few days, God willing. So the father was wise and led the family and was responsible. He wasn't a jerk. He wasn't an idiot. I mean, he could make mistakes, but obviously, you had Andy Griffith and these different models and things like that.
Of course, yeah.
And it's been for many years now that the father is the jerk, the idiot, the doofus, the Homer Simpsons of the world. And it blends into a larger culture of emasculating of men. And then that in turn attacks women and who they are and their role and their function in the over sexualizing of women and just making them into sexual objects and on and on. So it's a larger breakdown, but it connects. I mean, you can make an easy connection between that and the rise of porn. And you can make an easy connection between that and then the radical abortion spirit. By radical, I mean the shout your abortion movement. The dots all connect.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know
wow,
if you
yeah.
guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can.
We can.
Okay, good. So yeah, I'm so happy to be with you. Yeah. I really admire you and your work and everything you do. So I have some questions, and I mean, we can just follow the trend. And since we're talking about some spiritual and political stuff, we can probably tie those two things, and then we can move into the biblical stuff. Or I don't know if you mind if we just jump, from topic to topic, back and forth.
You folks lead the way. I'm here as your guest, so my joy to go whichever way you go.
Okay, thank you so much. So let me just say something really quick. This is like the first time, doing this. I've been doing this with SJ for, I would say, like 1 or 2 years, I think. And this is like the first time I got so many messages from people saying, please do not interview Dr. Brown because he's attacking us and he hates us. and I'm talking about people who from the LGBT community.
Ah,
So they think, that you hate them because, your message is hateful towards them. So, and I want to ask you just a few questions, towards that,
yeah.
if I can.
Yes, please.
Okay. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, good. So, in one of your papers, it is titled Christian Homo Hatred. You said that gay people should be treated with respect and dignity. You said that in the paper.
Hmm.
So you agree with that statement that gay people, people from the LGBT community, or any community for that matter, should be treated with respect and dignity, right?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Of course.
Yeah, but then you went on to say, and I'm just trying to play devil's advocate, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna try to do this. Yeah, then you went on to say that someone cannot practice homosexuality and be a Christian at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, that's because
And
yeah, love speaks the truth, and the word of God is 1,000% clear on that. There's not a single verse in scripture that can be raised to support homosexual practice. And there's a host of things that the word of God says you cannot live like this and follow Jesus at the same time. I mean, here, look, I had to abandon my ancestral religion, Judaism, and be considered a traitor and an apostate by my own people, to the point that people would spit on the ground when they know what I believe. But there's certain things we have to leave behind. Jesus said, if you love your own life, you can't be my disciple. But let me just say this one thing. I'm glad that you're connected enough with folks in the LGBT community that they consider you a friend and an ally, and that they reached out to you saying that you shouldn't interview me. It's a good sign that you're connected with them. And I hate the fact that people will take what I say and interpret it as hatred. That's just something you have to live with. In other words, if a Jewish rabbi thinks that I'm being hateful by saying without Jesus you're lost, despite you living a very devoted life and following all of our traditions, that's painful, but it's the reality. If I tell a same-sex couple that I don't believe that your relationship is valid in God's sight, I know it sounds
mhm.
hateful to them, but it comes out of a heart of love, and love has to speak the truth.
Something else that you said was someone was actually saying that homosexuality is like a gift from God, and then you said that it's not true because, and then you went on to compare that to zoophilia, coprophilia, and bestiality, and so on. Do you believe, since you believe that we have to respect them, but do you believe that that is like a good way of saying that, because it's going to be really hateful again to
Mhm.
those people. It's going to sound that way.
Yeah, so you have to again look at everything in context, because I'm
Hmm.
very, very careful in what I communicate and
Yeah, of
how I
course.
communicate it. So
Hmm.
here's the point. If someone says, for example, that being transgender is a gift from God, well, my
Hmm.
question would be then, if God has gifted you with that, why then are you going to have to basically castrate yourself, be on hormones for life, fight against your body? If this is a gift from God, something's not working out here. It'd be like saying cancer is a gift from God, so I'm going to get
Hmm.
chemotherapy to fight it. Well, if it's a gift from God, embrace it. So all I was doing was addressing the issue of this is innate and immutable, okay, which I do not
Hmm.
believe. Gay is not the new black, and sir, you did not have to come out as a person of color. You are a person of color. Someone has to come out
Hmm.
and declare who they are and come to certain conclusions over a period of life. So the simple point I was making was that if you say, because this is innate, because this is immutable, because I'm born
Hmm.
with this, it must therefore be a gift from God. Well, then what about all these other things? Say, for example, pedophilia, which many scientists say is innate and immutable. Just because it's innate and immutable, does that make it a gift from God? There are scientists who believe there's something called the violent gene. Others speak of an obesity gene. So if this is just in my nature from birth, it's innate and immutable, does that in and of itself make it a gift from God? No, of course not. But I make 1,000% clear as well that a loving consensual relationship between two adults, even though if they're of the same sex, even though it is sinful in God's sight, that should not be compared to, say, raping a child or having a relationship with an animal. I've been abundantly clear. And the only way that anyone could confuse those things is by taking little sentences out of context and putting them together.
No, of course. It's
Yeah,
just,
let me, well, let me, oh, I just
yeah,
wanted
go
to,
ahead.
I want to build on that because I think that these are some pretty important issues that you're talking about. And I think one of the things that I get concerned about is when you open the door to one thing and suddenly all of these other things fall in. And this idea, that you mentioned with transgender, my major concern with that, I've got some concerns, but my major concern has to do with giving these puberty blocking drugs to children to slow down their chances of going into puberty. And I think that that's pretty dangerous because it's really testing on children like guinea pigs.
Yeah, look, the National Association of Physicians in UK, which would be very liberal leaning overall in terms of ideologically, they put out a major statement that's getting attacked from transgender activists saying, slow down the process. Don't start assigning these drugs to kids so quickly. Let's use the wait and see approach, because a good 70–80% of kids who identify as transgender before puberty do not on the other side of puberty. So basically we're experimenting on kids. There's now a growing number of people, men and women in their early 20s, who had radical sex change surgery in their late teens. And they're saying, what did we do? Here's a woman who had, mastectomy and maybe even surgery beyond that. So you think, what happened? How was this encouraged? So if we really care, here's the bottom line. Love is not always going to be popular. Love is not always going to say things that people like to hear. And I've been on my knees sometimes weeping before God, saying, I don't want to hurt people. And I know the words I speak are going to sound hurtful, but love requires that we speak the truth. And I've sat with gay activists and out and proud homosexual men and women, on long flights talking, or just made lunch appointments to sit. And my first thing is always, tell me your story. And I want to understand you and better relate to you as a human being, and find out how we can be neighbors in the same city in the midst of our differences. And I've sat with people, tears streaming down my cheeks, and I just want you to know the love of our Heavenly Father. That's my heart. So of course we're going to be considered hateful. As long as I know if you cut me, I bleed love, and you get close enough to me, that's what you're going to realize. Then we just have to take the hate charges. Nothing we can do about it. We're going to be hated. We're going to be reviled. We're going to be misrepresented. But let it be, because we speak the truth in love. Because there are mean-spirited people out there. There are those that are harsh and destructive. And I regret that they make us all look bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm just trying to throw all of this because
you're doing great. You're doing great.
Yeah, there's so many people watching this right now, and they are gonna watch this, even if they're not watching it right now. They are going to do that, so that way we make sure that everything is clear, everything is clean, because they're gonna take it out of context. So I don't know if you guys want to talk a little bit more about politics, and we can jump into. Let me just
say this one thing, though, to everyone that's watching that identifies as LGBT, and or perhaps you have a friend, family member, so you consider yourself an ally of the LGBT community. Here's the question I have for you. If I'm absolutely convinced as a follower of Jesus that God made men for women and women for men, that God did not intend men to be with men and women to be with women, if I'm absolutely convinced that God's best is not to willingly deprive a child of either a mother or father. In other words, for a gay couple to bring a child into the world, there's a decision that that child will be raised without their biological mother or father by decision. If I feel that that's not in the best interest of the child, if I'm convinced, and I know former transgender people, for example, that had sex change surgery and now regret it and now don't identify as trans, if I'm convinced that God's best way would be to help that person find wholeness from the inside out, if I truly believe that, and I'm willing to lay my life down to help you as a fellow human being, all right, just like I would for anyone else, how is that hateful? In other words, if you tell me that you think my views are bigoted, that you think my views are primitive, that I'm following some Bronze Age book or Bronze Age God, I don't think you're hateful. I think that's your perspective. that's your perspective on me. And it doesn't bother me. I wish you didn't feel that way, but I understand it. So what if I truly believe this, and if love tells the truth, and if I know a lot of ex-gays. I know you say they don't exist, but I trust me, I know a lot, and I've known them for years, and you wouldn't know their names because they're not famous or anything like that. What should I do? In other words, if I'm convinced that this is best for society, if I'm convinced that the direction we're going is wrong, should I not have the right to speak? You have the right to speak. You have the right to be out and proud. Do we not have the right to be out and proud? And can we have differences without attributing it to hatred? Because look, right now, we're not going anywhere. The followers of Jesus aren't going anywhere. You're not going anywhere.
Mhm.
We're living in the same world together. Can we at least recognize that our differences are not necessarily based on hatred, but on deeply felt convictions, so that we can at least sit down at the table and talk? That's always my heart. So
Mhm.
just my appeal, and
Mhm.
I leave it there.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the
So
idea that you want to have freedom of speech and you want to be able to speak out. I think that's really important, because people do try to demonize you when not just you, but just anyone. If someone wants to speak out their opinion, and if they feel that it's biblically based, and people basically say, well, you can't say that, you're now being a transphobe or something like that. They try to give a label to you. I think that's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we're seeing
Mhm.
even in the universities today, even in my university.
yes, of course, yeah, and that's everywhere. So I don't know if you guys want to talk about the 2020 scenario, how everything is going with Trump and so on. We can talk a little bit about
Yeah, well,
politics.
tell you what,
Sure.
let me tie it in with the Jezebel book. All right.
Mhm. Oh yeah, please.
Yeah. So uh, there are obviously people in the Bible that stand out in certain ways, and they are so caricatured in their personalities that we can often relate to them. Like we can relate to a Jacob who really relies
Mhm.
on God, but then relies on the flesh at the same time, or a Peter who puts his foot in his mouth a lot, in the Gospels,
Mhm.
so zealous and so just different people in the Bible. It's like, oh yeah, I can be like a Martha, and just so busy with other things that I neglect sitting at Jesus' feet. So we make these parallels. Well, someone pointed out, actually a few different people, a Christian author and an Orthodox Jewish writer, pointed out that Donald Trump was kind of like a Jehu figure in the Bible. So we're not saying that
Mhm.
this was a prophecy of Trump, but a similar kind of guy. So he's a political outsider. Jehu was a general, was not of the royal line or anything like that, became zealous for Yahweh's cause, was even befriended by Jonadab the Rechabite, who was kind of like a Mike Pence type of guy, a
Mhm.
God-fearing, respectable guy, became very zealous for the Lord's work, but did it in such a way that there was a lot of collateral damage. He's described as reckless, the way he rides his horse, and he's reckless or a madman. And there's very much about Donald Trump that obviously conservative Christians really like, and his pro-life stance, his stance for Israel, his standing for religious liberties. And then there's a lot about his person that we obviously don't like, but just the kind of person he is. He's been called the great disruptor. Newt Gingrich says he wakes up every morning and asks, what can I disrupt today? And he's very much like a Jehu kind of figure. Gets a lot of good done, but a lot of collateral damage. And whichever side you're on of Trump, I think you'd
Mhm.
recognize some of this. Well, the reason I bring it up is because it's Jehu who comes into final conflict with Jezebel in the Bible and ultimately brings her down. Again, we're not talking about individuals here, we're talking about spiritual principles. So it's interesting that with the Trump presidency, obviously his misogynist past, his past statements, his
Mhm.
celebrating his being a playboy and all that. So a lot of women, a lot of men have real issues with him because of that past. But now you combine that with someone who's appointing pro-life justices, with someone who's standing for religious liberty and these things. So now you get a whole wave of hatred. But with the Jehu kind of figure, it brings up the Jezebel. So no surprise that with Trump coming
Mhm.
in, the pro-abortion movement gets all the more militant, scratching at the doors of the Supreme Court during the Kavanaugh hearings. It's no surprise that with the Trump presidency, you have the Madonnas of the world talking about blowing up the White House, and then you have the witches gathering now to hex him and ban him and
Mhm.
things like that. So I look at this as a very natural spiritual phenomenon. I don't know what that means in terms of 2020, But as long as Trump is present leading America, you're going to have this radical Jezebelic type of
Absolutely.
attack just out of the woodwork. And it makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I've
No,
got to
and
ask.
I was just gonna say that. I was just gonna say something really quick. When it comes to Trump, um, because so many people say, and this is so funny because secularists like to say, you know what, separation of church and state. But when it comes to Trump, they are not secularists. Now they say, what would Jesus do? So
Yeah,
what I want to
yeah.
ask you is, yeah, what I want to ask you is, do you think Donald Trump, as of right now, would be the best candidate for people like us, Bible believers, to vote for? I know that people like you and uh, what's the name of this guy who wrote the systematic theology? Wow,
Wayne Gruden.
Wayne
Yeah,
Gruden.
yeah.
Yeah, people like you and him and others. You guys actually support Trump, from what I can tell. And do you think Trump is the best option that we have?
Yeah. So number one, yes, I do. But let me explain. He's our president, not our savior. We need to make very clear that only one died for us, and we have ultimate allegiance to only one. He gets our soul. At most, the president gets our vote. So we are look at it like this. Let's say that the coronavirus was sweeping through the country, and we needed to put in charge a new health czar. And one guy was the best. I mean, he could literally save tens of millions of lives, but he's a jerk of a guy. He's nasty, he's mean spirited, he insults people. Well, I'd rather have him saving the millions of lives than this really nice guy that can't stop a cold, you know? So in the past, evangelicals have always said morality matters, character counts. And then it seems that many evangelicals have looked the other way with Trump. It's like, well, it did count, but there are more important issues. I think what we have to say is character counts, and we see good character in Trump keeping his word on many essential promises and fighting for things that are dear to us. But on the other hand, his character flaws really hurt him, and that grieves us. In other words, we have to just say, hey, I don't like the way he did this. I don't like the way he treated these other people. And I'm not going to follow suit and do the same to others. But in terms of our choices for president, right now, the three choices appear to be Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, or Joe Biden. So interesting with all the talk of diversity, you end up with three old white men. Just interesting the way it plays out, right? So Bernie Sanders, I mean, an out and proud socialist. To
Mhm.
call him communist is not going too far. And then
And he's also
to
Jewish.
right. So he's Jewish, but he's anti-Israel in many ways. And then on top of that, very, very strongly pro-abortion, things like that. Former Vice President Biden, although he's not a socialist, remember he came out for gay marriage before President Obama did in terms of publicly. He said, for example, transgender rights are the civil rights movement of today. He's now moved further to the left on his views on abortion. So these things are very, very major issues. Obviously, I think Trump's done a good job on the economy, but candidly, when I vote, that's not near the top of my list. It's important, but it's not near the top of my list. If I could push a button, say during the primaries, I was a Ted Cruz guy. I really opposed Donald Trump. I had grave concerns. So some of my concerns have been realized. In other words, the type of person that he is, I believe, has had a divisive and degrading effect on our national culture in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
Those were concerns I had. Those have been realized. The concerns I had that he was just using evangelicals, that he wouldn't keep his word, those have vanished. He has kept his word, and point after point, he remains open to input. I have some personal friends that are close with him and spend time with him, and they can really speak into his life. Obviously, there are ways we still want to see change, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, given our current options, I would vote for him without question or reservation. At the same time, making clear there are things he's going to say and do I don't like, and I will distance myself from those and make clear that that my testimony, who I am, is not defined by my vote for Donald Trump, but by allegiance to Jesus, and major
Amen.
on those things. Yeah.
Amen. I want to ask you something related to Donald Trump too, because I've been watching, when we look at the fact that Israel came back onto the map after 1,878 years in 1948, and we also see that Donald Trump is rather pro-Israel, as you've mentioned, and I've seen him in alignment with Netanyahu on a few things, but I'm wondering what your take is on whether the third temple, or if you've given any thought of what would happen. Are we in the end times? Should we expect a third temple to be popping up pretty soon, or what do you think?
Yeah, well, of course, I've thought about these things. I do believe that Scripture indicates that there will be a functioning temple before Jesus returns. Whether it's part of final deception of the Jewish people or the world, whatever prepares the way for an antichrist, that can easily be debated. It does seem to me that it is prophesied, but it's not so concrete that I'm looking for it to happen. I'm looking for the Lord's return as opposed to being focused on a building of a temple. I'm looking for the Great Commission to be fulfilled more than I'm looking at these other things. But that being said, yes, it does seem that prophetically there's scriptures that indicate this will happen. And where we are exactly time frame wise, who knows? We're in a situation now where so much is in place that wasn't in place a few generations ago. The rapid expansion of the gospel around the world has made the realization of the Great Commission, that every tribe, tongue would hear the gospel, more real and closer than ever. Israel being back in the land where so many scriptures indicate that a Jewish Jerusalem must welcome him back means that we're far closer than we've been before. But one thing is clear: if you keep a prophecy calendar, do it in pencil, because there's just a lot that, as it unfolds, it becomes clear as it happens. Who expected when Israel was rebirthed in 48, and many people pointing to it prophetically and saying, we knew this was coming, it's in the scriptures, but who thought now that we'd be more than 70 years later? So things are unfolding. But when I came to faith in 71, we were told this is it. Jesus is coming at any moment. And I was 16 years old and, heroin shooting, LSD using hippie rock drummer. And I got saved. And Hal Lindsey's book, Late Great Planet Earth, was the rave of the day. And it's any moment, Jesus coming kind of thing. And well, obviously that didn't happen. So I'm living with an earnest expectation. I want to see the Lord return in my lifetime, while at the same time doing everything I know how to train the next generation and the generation after that. Because one thing we know for sure is every generation that's lived up to now has died so far. That much we know.
Yeah, that's true. I also, let me just ask one more question, and then Joel, you got a couple there, but I wanted to also ask you about the ancient Near East, and going back to this idea with Jezebel and the ancient Near East. Would you think that the people, because I get asked a lot about biblical slavery and a lot of the different issues in the laws in the Old Testament, and I'm just wondering what you think about their culture relative to our culture. How would the people in the ancient Near East consider us today if they were suddenly immersed in our culture?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. There are things we look back at with somewhat horror in terms of the ancient world, and there are things that are in the Old Testament that seem tremendously harsh to us, like Saudi Arabia beheading adulterers today. Well, biblical law, you would have stoned an adulterer to death, and laws permitting slavery or sanctioning aspects of slavery, even with all the caveats, still those things strike us as harsh. But if you took someone from the ancient world, first brought them over here, they'd be utterly shocked by our individualism. They'd be mortified by the breakdown of family, by the lack of respect for elders. They would be beyond shocked by the rampant sexual immorality that they see. So there'd be a lot that they would see here. Look, you could take someone from raised in a strict Muslim culture, someone who's not a terrorist, doesn't want to blow up the world, just a devoted Muslim. You could bring them over to the West, and when they see us, they're shocked. When they see our TV and movies and things like that, they're utterly shocked by the degeneration of our society. So each society has had strengths and weaknesses, and certain things we've made a lot of progress, and other things we're regressing, to be honest.
Yeah, those are some great points, because I think that you're right. And I just read Tom Holland's book Dominion too, and it kind of relates to this idea of our individualism, as you mentioned, and this idea of equality, that we value equality. And where did that strange thing come from?
Yeah, and again, look, there are many things that are wonderful and beautiful that have developed as a result of the gospel being in our culture and certain values that we have taken on. and application of them. So, for example, even though there were Christians who justified the horrors of the African slave trade, it was ultimately Christian truths that turned us away from those sins and the sin of slavery. So, what we have to do, though, is not make America the norm. Because as I travel the world, I've been outside the U.S. about 200 times. You're in different parts of the world, and you're kind of shocked by the way they look at America, And I'll just give you one example. I was reading one book about misreading scripture through Western eyes, and one of the authors was two men wrote it. One of the authors was a missionary in Indonesia, and he talked about a village church, and they were debating whether to allow this young couple back into the church. And it was a very grave sin they committed. And he said, well, what sin was that? He said, when he described it, basically they eloped. They just took off and got married. So he's like, what's the problem with that? They got married. That's a good thing. And the guy says to him, one of the elders, have you never read the words of Paul, who said, children, obey your parents? The idea that children would do that was such an affront to their culture that it was basically an excommunicable sin. So the question was, should they be allowed back in the church? Now, again, through our Western culture, it's like, what's the big deal? But in a biblical culture, an ancient Near Eastern culture, or New Testament culture, these things would have been shocking. So what we have to do, when I travel overseas, I always travel with a humility towards other cultures. And when there's something that's plainly sinful, we recognize it as such. But the American way, the individualistic way, the hedonistic way that we're used to is very foreign to much of the rest of the world.
True. Joel, did you?
Oh, yeah, of course. I have a ton of questions here. So I'm just kind of debating in my mind whether we should talk a little bit more about politics and then jump into some biblical stuff, or maybe just jump
we may
back
have,
and forth.
hey, let me just say this, just as we look at the clock, if you want to keep going in one direction and then find another time to go in a different direction, I'm fine with that. I'm here as your guest, so you make your decisions and I'll run with it.
Yeah, we don't have as much time as many questions.
Let me just ask you this question, because there is a lawyer. His name is Alan Dershowitz. Maybe you know who he is.
Of course.
So he says that he's against the idea of having the 10 Commandments. Not all of them, but just some of. He says that some of them are fine, but some of them contradict the Constitution, because one of the commandments says that you shall not have other gods before me, or something like that. And he says that goes against our Constitution, or any Constitution. So how can we have the 10 Commandments and also follow the Constitution at the same time?
Yeah, well, that was obviously no problem to the framers of the Constitution. I think they would have been somewhat surprised by the question. Obviously, Thomas Jefferson did not push for enforcing religion on people. And you had certain debates from the origins of our country. But it was understood that the Constitution was only made for religious and moral people. Otherwise, it couldn't function. It'd be like the rules that you have to have for little children versus the rules you have to have for older children or for adults, that the older you are, you don't have to make rules about every little thing because people have more responsibility. So if in my book, Saving a Sick America, I go back and look at a lot of the origins of our country and how Christian the colonies were. I mean, in the early colonies, there was the Old Deluder Act, the Old Deluder being Satan, where one of the colonies had a law that once you got to 50 people in a community, you had to establish a school so that children could learn to read so they could read the Bible. And they weren't going to let Satan keep them from reading the scriptures. I mean, this is just fundamental, basic. So there was so much built into that. The Constitution's emphasis on the inalienable rights that we have from the Creator presume that we're worshiping that one God. So again, I do understand with society becoming more pluralistic and more secular, why we have battles over the 10 Commandments. At the same time, I'm quite sure that if we had the 10 Commandments on the walls of our schools, it would have a more positive effect for kids to be seeing that than seeing other images. So I fully understand in today's society why this is debatable. And I'm no constitutional expert. I mean, Dershowitz is a Harvard professor. But from my understanding of the founders and their view of America, it was taken for granted that we would be a God-fearing country, and that would be at the heart of what we did and who we were.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fascinating. What you said, what was the name of that book you just mentioned that you wrote?
Saving a Sick America.
Okay, great. Another great book to pick up. So in case I want to point out these two books that I have, but he's written a lot more. So I've got the
and hang
Jezebel.
on. Yeah, just to be fair, Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, if you hold that up, that's one of 5 volumes. So just, that's, what volume is that you have there?
Volume 1.
All right, there are 4 after that.
Oh, I didn't even know that.
Oh,
Wonderful.
so they're 5. Just go
my
ahead.
favorite is the your commentary on Jeremiah. Outstanding commentary.
Oh, thank you. Now we've got Job. Commentary on Job came out in October, and I'm about to start working on Isaiah. So thank you, sir. That's very encouraging.
Can I ask you a question about your Job commentary? Because I heard some people saying that, I don't know if this is true, but they say that your inspiration for the Job commentary was because of the debate you had with Bart Ehrman.
No. The Job commentary, my interest in that vastly predates the Bart Ehrman debate. I mean, that's interesting that people would say that. No, what happened was, as a new believer reading the Bible, I was fascinated by Job, because once you get into the book, it's like everybody's contradicting everybody, but I agree with everybody. I was like, how does that work? And then over the years, I would teach classes, Bible college, seminary classes on Job. It was about 10 years ago, teaching at Southern Evangelical Seminary, an intensive 1-week class on Job, that I just got so consumed with it. I'd been reading commentaries on Job and books on Job for decades. I just felt so compelled to write. But in the midst of it, in debating Bart Ehrman, I drew lessons from the book of Job in terms of the problem of suffering.
You actually did a great job in that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and that debate, I spent a lot of time talking through with my wife, Nancy, because when we met at 19 years old, she was a real staunch atheist, and then God saved her, brought us together. So she would critique my arguments and tell me, no, that doesn't work. That's going to sound stupid to an atheist. I said, I don't get it. And then she'd explain, it's like, okay, now I see from that. So I kept trying to sensitize myself to that point of view. But obviously the problem of suffering is the ultimate human question, and the most fundamental one that's going to come up with people of faith and non-faith. And the book of Job is the most extraordinary book in addressing it in a way that we would not do, coming from very different angles. Yeah,
that's actually one of the things that a lot of atheists do approach me about, is the book of Job, and they'll say that Job was treated unfairly. Do you feel like God treated Job unfairly?
Well, first thing is, can God do anything that's unfair according to his nature? And we would say no, and that doesn't impress an atheist. But what we have to say is, what would Job say? If you ask Job how he felt in the end about being the target of this heavenly battle, and being in the center of this question, does anyone worship God altruistically and just love God for who he is, or do people only do it for the outward benefits? So Job is now part of this cosmic battle between Yahweh and Hasatan, the adversary, in the presence of the angelic hosts. If you ask Job at the end of his life, is he glad that he went through it? Of course, he'd say categorically yes. And it's on 2 levels. First and foremost, he says in the 42nd chapter, I heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. So that's one of the mysteries, that often the worst things that happen to us can be the best things. That if we will work with the Lord in the midst of our pain and loss and bereavement, what was meant for evil can ultimately turn for good. And many would say, yeah, I'm a better person having gone. I never want to go through that again, but I'm better for having gone through it. So that's the one thing. And then Job lives the rest of his life happily ever after. So the terrible loss of his children is always there. But there's also the hint of those children in the world to come. So just like many of us have gone through our own mini crucifixion experiences, which we hate, but they lead to resurrection. And on the other side, we're glad we went through it. So I would say Job is the only one that can answer that. And he would say emphatically, I'm glad that I was chosen out as the most righteous man on the earth and the one who could uniquely pass through this fiery trial. And not only that, it now benefits millions and millions of others for generations to come who benefit from the lessons in Job.
That's true.
I got a question, if I can ask. And I'm going to go back to this same thing we were talking about, prior, and I forgot to ask you this question. So someone just sent me this question, and it is about, what is your take on conversion therapy?
Yeah, well, conversion therapy is the word that the world uses, okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's just like referring to your views or my views as homophobic. So I don't want to use the world's terms, but how do I feel about counselors sitting with people, helping them to get to the root of their same-sex attraction or gender confusion? Wonderful. Why isolate this area and say that we can't do that? We do it with 1,000 other areas. Try to find out why I respond certain ways, why I think certain ways, why I act certain ways, why I deal with chronic depression, why I deal with mood swings, why, whatever. If there's a behavior and attitude, something in my life that I'm not happy with and at home with, then you sit down with a professional counselor and get help. If you're talking about shock therapy, come on, this is not what's being practiced, or kidnapping children and stringing them up at some camp and whipping the gay out of them. I mean, number one, most of these horror stories are completely fabricated, completely made up.
Of course.
And where they did happen, if it's a terrible, despicable, horrific, everybody on the planet involved with helping people deal with same-sex attraction says no to that junk. And even so-called shock therapy and stuff, that was used for a host of other things. And this is just one thing where people use wrong practices. But to sit with someone and to help them deal with unwanted same-sex attraction, here's my question. Why do you want to ban that? Why do you want to make that illegal? I mean, California almost went ahead with a ban for people of all age. It's a ban for minors now. How is that right? You got a 16-year-old girl who was raped repeatedly by an uncle from the ages of 8 to 10. As she came into puberty, she was conflicted in her desires. She had a real mistrust of men. She felt more at home with women. Now she finds herself attracted to women, and she doesn't like that. Maybe she's raised in a Christian faith, and she feels it's wrong. Maybe her goal when she was a little girl was to marry a man and have children, and now she's thinking, well, I'm not even attracted to men. I'd like to get to the root of this. It's illegal in a bunch of states. That's cruel. That is cruelly imposing something on someone. You say, well, what if you were offering snake oil to a cancer patient? Well, this is not snake oil because many have been helped. Many have found a reduction.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say what I'm talking about. What about if you have someone who was born and didn't go through any of those traumas in life or anything like that? Just let's say someone who was born, grew up, had a normal life, type thing.
Yeah.
But that person is still gay or lesbian, and they find like, okay, I'm cool with this. I'm fine with this. There's nothing wrong with me. So
yeah. That's between
so
them and God.
What about?
Yeah.
Yeah, but what about in that case? When it comes to conversion therapy, I'm sorry, I don't like to use that term because I know it's really.
No, go ahead. Go ahead there.
Yeah, but please allow me to use the term. What about someone who didn't have any trauma in the past? They were not raped or violated or anything like that. And should those people still go through a conversion therapy as well?
Yeah, if they want to, that's their choice. In other words, no one's saying that you should force this on anyone. God forbid. And look, if I'm a parent and one of my kids came out as gay and no trauma, raised in a good home, no sexual abuse, anything like that, I would first let them know, hey, you're my child. I love you, period. That's always going to be the same. You're always going to be my child. And I want to be involved in your life just as much now as ever. And I'm glad you've been honest and told me about your feelings. can we just pray about this? Can we look at the scriptures together?
Yes.
You know, and whatever, they're still going to make their own choices. You can't force them to go to counseling or something like that. But if it's a 20-year-old guy and he's happy being gay and he's in love with his partner and whatever, that's between him and God. I'm not his policeman or his ruler or anything like that. But if he's conflicted either religiously or morally or socially, and he wants to try to find out why he has these desires, and because we are complex human beings, you know. We know scientifically that there is no reputable evidence that anyone is, quote, born gay. When you look at the American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, which are totally liberal on all these, they say we don't know why. We don't know why. We still can't say. So if there was a gay gene or something like that, they would be saying it. They say we still don't know why. It seems to be maybe partly nature, partly nurture, things like that. So it's a complex issue. So if someone wants help, why shouldn't they be able to get it? And that's the whole deal. Maybe you're watching, you said, you don't know what this did to me. This traumatized me. This hurt me. You know, my parents wanted me to go and I went. It's messed up my life. It's taken me years to recover. I'm terribly sorry you've been through that, but don't deprive someone else of making the choice to go. Don't deprive a child from making the choice to get counseling therapy or counseling help, and don't fight against an adult doing it. That's an utter attack on someone's freedoms. So yeah, you're free to live life. If you're not breaking the law, then you're free to live life the way you live. I'm free to live life the way I live, and we have our differences. That's fine. Amen. Let it be. Yep. But let's have the freedom to make these choices.
Yeah, I think you're making a good point. Just taking away the freedom to actually get the therapy, that's a problem, and I think that's a great point that you're making.
Yeah, and look, the whole reason that God laid it on my heart to get involved with the LGBT issues starting in 2004 was not because of what people were doing in the privacy of their homes or relationships that they were building in their own lives, or if some church was offering them a blessing ceremony for their relationship. It was because of the activism that wanted to radically alter our society. And those who came out of the closet wanted to put us in the closet. Your average gay, lesbian person just wants to live their life and not be bothered and let their relationships be looked at as valid as anybody else's. But the activists have made clear that we are the enemy, that you had the psychiatric profession that said homosexuality is a sickness, and you had the religious world that said it's a sin. So the psychiatric profession was dealt with pretty quickly beginning in 1973. So we remain the obstacle. In that sense, Haman is not happy until Mordecai bows down, and we are the Mordecai of the society. So that's why I got involved. And my heart has been reach out to the people with compassion, resist the agenda with courage, because it is one that is trying to silence, intimidate us. And the unspoken mantra of gay activism has been, we will intimidate and we will manipulate until you capitulate. And we have to say, we're not going to capitulate. We do hold to our views and we'll continue to do so, but we'll do it with love. Yeah.
No, and I was just going to say once again, because I know some people are listening, you and I, we are on the same page. I'm just trying to bring the other side, so we can actually talk about these issues, because they are extremely important right now. Yeah, and thank God, for your book on Jezebel and others. Yeah, it's we really needed all of that, and I think this interview is so important, and that's why I'm trying to bring all of those questions. It's not that I disagree with you.
Oh no, and yeah, for someone tuning in that doesn't know you, the other thing is that I'm glad that you have not repeatedly said you're playing the devil's advocate, because then as if the people we're differing with are the devil's side. The fact is, the devil wants to destroy the human race.
Of course,
he hates us. Period. And we believe and are sure that through Jesus we can be delivered from the devil's stratagems and come into wholeness in God. Yeah.
I want to build off of just one quick thing that you said before. And you mentioned this idea of being a feminist. And, I used to call myself a feminist, and I had only the one definition of, I think that women should get equal rights. And I used to think about things like women not having rights even to drive a car at one point in Saudi Arabia. That was recently changed. But the new definition of feminism, like you mentioned, has become rather extreme. These women out there screaming how they're, hey, I had an abortion, you had an abortion too. I mean, we're seeing some really scary things in society, and people are talking about legalizing prostitution and this idea of making abortion in the 3rd trimester. I mean, it's gotten so radical that what's next?
Yeah, so in Jezebel's War with America, I have a whole chapter on radical feminism. And it's interesting that when you go back into the late 60s, when things shifted so dramatically in our culture, the counterculture revolution of the 60s, that's when you have the rise of radical feminism. And one of the groups, was a women's international group, and the acronym spelled out WITCH, but it was this Women's International Conspiracy from Hell. I mean, it's just like spelling out who they were, and this is in the late 60s, and they were associated with witchcraft and everything. So when you look at how much radical feminism and the rise in witchcraft intersect, and when I wrote Jezebel's War with America, much of it was written in a short period of time. About 70% of the core of the book I wrote in a day and night period of about 6 days, just so consumed with chapter after chapter, and then of course filled everything out dramatically. But we had two people, at least two, with the publisher who were fact checkers, and they went through every single reference and vetted every internet reference and every reference from a book, and because there's so much intense information in there. And a couple we had to find, okay, let's find a better website with the same information or something like that. But everything checked out. In other words, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not making this up. And then I've got quote after quote after quote from some of the feminist pioneers. And you see what they have to say. It's extraordinary. And what's really interesting now is that there is a clash between radical feminists of old, some of the feminist icons, and the transgender movement. Because now you have men identifying as women. Is like everything we fought for years as women. Now you're saying you're a woman, and now you got Bruce Jenner as woman of the year with Glamour magazine a couple of years back. That men still do it better than women. Here's a man, he's going to be woman of the year, and women, in their private spaces and things like that. Now you have biological men infiltrating, and then you even have conflicts with certain lesbian activists and transgender activists. So it's almost like when you let everything just unfold and go its natural way, it's going to create more and more conflict and division. Yes. Because the agendas are quite radical and ultimately isolationist.
Yeah, I think we might only have a few minutes. I think we had till 1 o'clock. Is that about?
Yeah, we got about 3 minutes, then I got to do my own radio. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same thing is happening with sports. Now we have, men trying to play as women, in sports, and that's why they're actually, in some cases, in some sports, they're actually even winning by a lot.
You have Gavin Hubbard in New Zealand, Australia, in the Commonwealth Games. Yes. This is now a man that was a male weightlifter, a professional weightlifter, now identifies as a woman. So he's setting all the world records. He could make it into the Olympics. I mean, how is that fair to women
unfair
who worked for years and years? You have Hannah Mounsey. This is a good-sized man who was going to play in Australian rules football with women. And so, that got blocked. He said, now you're body shaming and all this stuff. You have now different states that are passing laws or trying to pass laws that would ban a biological male from competing with biological female. You've had some races where the first two finishers were biological males. So that means that out of the 3 girls that would have medaled, only 1 medals. You're talking about scholarship opportunities and things like that. So bad. So it's completely unfair. And you say, what about the trans athletes? Well, if you identify a certain way, then that's your choice. Ultimately, you're making a decision that I'm going to identify this way and live a certain way. And the whole world does not bow down to that and now change the whole system. We try to be compassionate. So let's say, for example, you're a kid in a school and you're 6 years old and a boy and you're identifying as a girl and you want to use the girls' bathroom. Well, that's unfair to the girls. Okay, let's find a single bathroom you can use by yourself then. We'll do our best to accommodate you in the midst of your struggle, but we don't turn the world upside down to accommodate that. So let there be trans athletic games then, do something like that, but don't impose it on others.
That would be fine.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that you don't find a whole lot of women identifying as men and playing in men's sports. It's not exactly what you expect to happen. But look,
we can't compete.
And look, here's the other thing. I can't imagine what someone has lived through to want to make these changes. I have an older cousin that lost a whole lot later in life by saying he's actually a woman. I don't trivialize that. I can't relate. I can't even imagine. If I sit and think, how can I imagine what it would really feel like to believe I'm a woman trapped in a man's body? So I have compassion on people struggling, but I'm sure that God's way, God's best is to help someone from the inside out rather
Amen.
than to have to go through radical sex surgery and then be on hormones for life and then still never be 100% male or female when you make the switch. There's got to be a better way. And it's not hate to say, let's keep looking for that better way.
Amen. Thank you so
Amen.
much. I mean,
thank you.
I'm so happy to have talked to you. I admire you and your work a lot. You know how much this means to me.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I profoundly apologize for missing the first appointment. It was on my calendar and I somehow missed it. So thanks for being gracious and having me back on.
Oh, no worries.
thank you.
And so last thing I want to say, everybody, please go out and buy his books. These are 2 of them. I'm going to actually do links in the channel so that you can get to other access to his books. And thank you so much, Dr. Brown, for coming
And the
on.
commentary on Jeremiah as well. The commentary on Jeremiah.
And
Awesome.
on Job.
The best commentary ever. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, the
Fantastic.
website, of course, is askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org. So we got thousands of hours of free resources waiting for you there. Well, God bless you. Great talking to both of you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end it.
All right.